Hello everyone, welcome to another video. My name is Lance and this is Wartilio. This is the follow-up to our previous video, which is about Age of Sigmar Team Tournament Basics, and now I am back to give some shorthand on Age of Sigmar Team Tournament Advanced Skills. So this is not going to be a video that tells you how to do every single matchup and tell you like the Pokemon chart strengths and weaknesses of every army in the meta, because that would be impossible and the meta is changing constantly. Right now someone is making a list that is going to completely flip the meta on its head and we have never seen it yet. So this is just going to give you some shorthand things to look out for and ways to communicate with your teammates when you are doing pairings or when you are list building and doing a team comp. The first one is the traffic light system. This is kind of everywhere in teams. If you have ever been to a team tournament or an international event on Discord or wherever, you will see some people communicate using colors. Like this matchup was a red, or this matchup was a yellow, or a green, or orange even, or lime green sometimes. But what does that mean? It means that players often try to allocate matchups into like 3 different buckets: easy, medium, and hard. So red matchups tend to give a score of 0 to 5 in differentials between you and your opponent. A yellow matchup tends to yield about 6 to 14 points, about middle of the pack. You know, if you win, you don't really win that big, and if you lose, you don't lose that big. You still contribute some points to your team. And lastly, the green matchups, which tend to be 15 to 20 points. These are the big W's, and if you are able to catch some tailwinds on this, then your team is looking like it's in a good spot. The traffic light system tends to assume that everyone is equal in skill in pairings with balanced team compositions. And if you have 2 different captains with equal skill and balanced team compositions, pairings would normally result in having about 4 yellows, 2 greens, and 2 reds each. Now, I would like to put a note to this. The system is shorthand, and it should not replace actual analysis and experience. It's very possible that you could expect, let's say, 2 Nurgle lists to be yellow with each other because they're the same faction. However, it's possible that one Nurgle list has snuck in a little something that makes it good against another one. Here is an example. Actually, a better example would be 2 Lumineth lists, right? So you have a tech list and you have a Huracan Shooty list. On average, the Huracan Shooty list tends to do really well against tech lists, which would make that matchup a red, wherein normally, if you look at the allegiances, they'd both be yellows. This system should not dominate the way you think. It shouldn't give you feelings, it shouldn't put you in a box where you think, oh, my captain put me in the red, I guess I lose. It just is a good primer for new players to communicate with their captain, or their captains to communicate with their players, or keep notes on what are good or bad matchups in tournaments with like hundreds of lists. Okay, on the list building. Lists tend to be skewed against meta threats, battle plans, or archetypes. And I'm going to talk about some examples here. If you and your friends don't have a lot of knowledge of the meta threats, battle plans, and general archetypes of your local community, you're probably better off with everyone bringing a generalist list that can take on anything. However, especially big tournaments, when you have tournaments of like maybe 5 to 8 people, and there is a very big meta threat out there that you kind of want to contain, it becomes a little bit more possible to skew a list to fighting a certain thing. Here's an example. This Stormcast Eternals list by Patrick Mandapat was designed to defeat an army that's very prominent in my country right now, Techless Lumineth. And if you are listening to this in October 2024, this is probably also pretty common in your countries as well. So this list sports multiple Vanguard Raptors, which have Ren 2 and have relatively decent range that can pick off tech lists early in the game. This is a very all or nothing kind of list, and if it punches hard and kills the fulcrum in which your enemy's army revolves around, then you've pretty much won the game. So this thing is designed for those kinds of matchups. Anything with like a big centerpiece, let's say Nagash or Techless, maybe not Alariel because she brings herself back from the dead, possibly an Archaeon. Not entirely sure of the full breadth of this, but this is an example of a skew list against armies that have a lot of resilience, a lot of recursion, a lot of staying power. I think that this army will not do particularly well. So it's not really great for an RTT or a GT. So it's likely that this is best at home in your holster in a team setting. Another example that I have for skewing a list a certain way is to build a list so that it can score lots of tactics. Sometimes players would call this a bus list. It is a list that's designed not necessarily to win or outscore your opponent, but make it so that your opponent will struggle to create a big differential between you and your opponent. In most games, this is done by scoring the minimum primaries, let's say scoring 4 points in primaries and scoring every battle tactic. And I designed this corn list to be kind of resilient and have lots of MSU units that are relatively fast and expendable and just there to score tactics every turn. And after enough of the units that are expendable have died, it is meant to recycle all of that blood and turn that into a bloodthirster again, with which to score even more tactics. Probably like having the Unfettered Fury pop up on maybe round 3 or round 4 to do Ordained Charge from behind enemy lines or do Take Their Lands then, while everything else be dedicated to doing Take the Flank, Seize the Center, and other ridiculous things early on in the game. Battle plans. Another thing that's interesting about teams is that you don't always have to tank your worst battle plans. Like if you're an army that's good in Scorched Earth, you're not necessarily gonna have to play focal points or shifting objectives or things that are more centrally oriented, right? So you can rely on your team and your captain to put you in battle plans that are good for you. But what are shorthand for battle plans that are good for defensive and offensive matchups? Different armies are strong in different battle plans, and identify which battle plans have high scoring gaps. If you need to tank an unfavorable matchup, send a player in battle plans with many objectives. This makes it easier to score 2 objectives, which allows a player to score 8 points on average in most battle plans that exist in Age of Sigmar 4th edition. Likewise, you want to have favorable matchups in missions with less objectives, where both armies have to engage each other. If the match is decided earlier, you tend to score more points. Mental note, this was made in October of 2024, and some meta situations turn this rule on its head. But for now, let's see some examples. Here's an example of a good defensive battle plan. You want to put an army that's good at scoring battle tactics with a lot of MSUs that want to just mitigate your opponent's star player. If you can trap your opponent's high scoring turbo like aggro army or grindy Death Star army in an 8 objective mission, you can mitigate the score difference. Even if they score 50 points or the perfect score, you could probably get about 8 points per turn in a mission like this. Why is that? One, it's easy to score primary points. In this particular mission, you just need to hold 2 objectives to score 4 points out of the 6 points maximum in primary. There's lots of objectives. There's so much room to run away from your opponent from. You could huddle into a corner or split up or teleport to the other side when your opponent leaves it. And lastly, it does not encourage immediate engagement. If you're playing something teleporty, let's say Sylvaneth or Skaven, and you don't want to fight against the big, mean Sons of Behemoth or Varangard enemy army, this is a great mission to kind of dodge it. You know, you'll probably lose if you go head to head or fail a big prio roll. But if you play this mission correctly and score 8 points per turn and tailor your list to scoring battle tactics and just holding 2 objectives, the differential is likely just going to be 10 points, assuming the best case scenario for your opponent and a sort of good scenario for yourself. This allows you to score lots of points for your team while also mitigating the score of your opponent. Here's an example of an offensive battle plan. Focal points. Look at it. It's 5 objectives. Normally, I would say something like, that's a lot of objectives, but they're all centrally located, right? Everything is within like of good 15 inches or 11 inches of each other. This is a really bad mission to put a bad matchup in because it's one, hard to score primaries. To score primaries in this mission, you only score 1 for holding 1, 1 for holding 2, and 1 for holding more. And you score the other 3, half of the primary points every round, by dominating the battlefield by holding 2 flanks and 2 homes. This is the kind of mission that you want to put a dominant matchup in. Let's say you have something really punchy and fast, like, let's use the example of Varangard again, or OBR Death Riders with Nagash. Like, all of those are really good in missions like this, which force a fight early and take advantage of its extremely long reach. The objectives being centralized forces players to commit or battle it out early. And if you settle a game earlier rather than later, then the differentials between your score and your opponent's score will be far greater. So if you want to tank a bad matchup, you want to avoid this. Or if you want to try to capitalize on a favorable matchup, you want to put your favorable matchup in a mission that's like this, shifting objectives, or anything with a few objectives that's centrally oriented. And that is all. This is probably a shorter video than you'd expect for an advanced 4-team tournaments, but I think it's more useful to give you a lot of shorthand information for what to look out for, some Swiss knife like thinking methods to help clear up the thinking. And I hope that this helps you and your team in future team tournaments, makes thinking about pairings a little less murky and a little bit more accessible. If you like this kind of content, give us a like, give us a sub, and hope to see you in the next video.